You know, sometimes the most terrifying things happen on the most ordinary evenings. That evening was no different from hundreds of others. I was sitting on the edge of our bed, checking email on my phone, and Artem was talking to someone on the phone. He thought he had hung up, but his finger missed a button, and our call didn't end. At first, I was just going to put my own phone down, but then I heard his laugh, that same, slightly fake one he uses in business negotiations, and I froze. "Our marriage is awful," he said to that invisible interlocutor, and his voice was so calm, as if he were discussing the weather. "But I am only with her because of her family's money." In that moment, nothing broke inside me. On the contrary, everything inside froze, became perfectly clear and sharp. I didn't drop the phone, I didn't scream, I even stopped breathing. I just sat and stared at the wall, as if waiting for an explanation to appear on it. His voice came through the speaker again, careless and honest. "Her dad is loaded. You think I'd still be in this if there wasn't a trust fund behind it?" Another voice muttered something in response, and they both laughed. A quiet, understanding, conspiratorial laugh. "So you are just going to ride it out?" the stranger asked. A pause. Then Artem answered as if he were proud of his calculations. "2 more years, maybe 3. Then I'll have enough to walk away. She won't even see it coming. She is too comfortable." I ended the call. My hand didn't shake. The shaking would come later. In that moment, I just stared at the screen as if it had just delivered a death sentence. And in a way, it had a death sentence for the version of my life I thought was real. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of shared dinners, trips together, late night talks in bed, arguments and reconciliations. All of it had turned into a rehearsal, a rehearsed performance. I leaned back against the pillows, letting what I'd heard settle inside me like dust in my lungs. The betrayal didn't come with screams or tears. It came with silence, an eerie, hollow silence where my own heartbeat felt deafeningly loud. Then I opened the drawer where I kept our wedding photos. There was one we both loved, a candid shot of us laughing in the rain, soaked, ridiculous, alive. I used to think that moment was real. Now I wondered if he'd already been calculating back then. If he'd seen the daughter of a successful businessman and not the person standing next to him. I remembered our engagement, how fast it all happened, how he charmed my family. My dad, always cautious, had taken the longest to warm up to him, but eventually said, "He seems solid." And my mom had said with pride, "You picked someone with good instincts." Had I? Did I? That night, I didn't sleep. I lay next to the man who had just confirmed he didn't love me, who saw our marriage as a temporary investment. His breathing was even peaceful. I wondered if he knew how loud that silence felt from my side of the bed. The next morning, I acted normal. I made coffee just like I always did. He came downstairs in his sweatpants, kissed the top of my head, told me I smelled good. "Sleep okay?" he asked. I smiled. "Yeah, you like a rock." He poured his usual half cup. "No sugar, working from home today." I nodded. "Just a few calls." I watched him from across the kitchen, the way he leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone. I noticed everything now, the way he glanced at our shared calendar, how he tapped a notification and quickly swiped it away. I didn't ask what it was. I'd stopped wanting to know. When he left, I didn't cry. I opened my laptop and stared at a blank document. I was supposed to be reviewing contracts. Instead, I opened a note and wrote down what I'd heard on that call, word for word. I needed it preserved, not for court, for myself, because I knew there would be days ahead when I'd doubt what I'd heard. When I'd think I was overreacting, convince myself to stay. That note would remind me I wasn't crazy. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house but didn't go inside. I sat in the car, engine off, staring at the front porch. I couldn't bring it to them. Not yet. My dad would ask for proof. My mom would blame herself, and I couldn't handle their pain on top of my own. I got back home before he did, lit a candle, put on soft music, started making dinner. When he walked in, he smiled like he always did, said, "Smells amazing in here." Kissed my cheek, told me he'd missed me. I smiled back, "I missed you too." That evening, we ate dinner together. He told me about a pitch meeting that went well, said someone was interested in his startup idea. I asked questions, played the supportive wife. I knew he was hoping for a buy-in from my father eventually. That was always the unspoken goal. After dinner, he poured wine and turned on the fireplace. We watched a movie I didn't care about. He pulled me close. I let him, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to map the routine, every moment of intimacy, every practiced move. I had to see it all clearly if I was going to unravel it. I went to bed before him, told him I was tired. He said he'd be up soon. I lay there again, staring at the ceiling, letting his words echo. Too comfortable. She won't see it coming, but I saw it. And I wouldn't stay comfortable for long. I saw it, and I wouldn't stay comfortable for long. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. It wasn't that I couldn't sleep, I just didn't want to. The bed felt foreign. His presence beside me, the steady rise and fall of his chest, his fingers lightly grazing my arm. These things that used to anchor me now made my skin itch. I slipped out quietly, showered in silence, and stared at my reflection for a long time. It was strange how ordinary I looked. No one would have guessed that less than 48 hours ago, I'd overheard my husband calculating his exit strategy from the marriage he helped build. Not because it wasn't working, not because we'd grown apart, but because I came attached to a bank account. In the kitchen, I started making coffee before realizing I didn't want any. I poured the water anyway. The motions grounded me. When he came downstairs, his hair wet from his own shower, wearing the same navy sweatshirt he always did on work. From home days, I kept my expression neutral. "You are up early," he said, yawning. "Didn't sleep great. Too much wine last night?" he asked, reaching for a mug. I smiled faintly. "Maybe." He kissed the top of my head. I flinched. Not noticeably, but enough that I felt it. He didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he'd grown so used to my compliance that he didn't notice anything unless it disrupted his script. After breakfast, I sat at the kitchen island, my laptop open, my calendar full of meetings I had no intention of joining. I stared at the screen while my mind wandered. 3 years. That is how long we'd been married. Almost exactly. And somehow, in less than 3 minutes of overheard audio, I was being forced to reassess every single moment of it. Was he lying when he said I looked beautiful in the mornings? When he cried at our wedding? Was it real or just good acting? When he talked about kids? Was that part of the plan too? Build deeper ties, make it harder to walk away, harder to untangle the money. I thought about our first year together, the small apartment we rented downtown, the way we'd save up for takeout and share cheap wine on the fire escape. I'd believed in us then, in him. I remember telling my sister, he is the kind of man who makes the world feel solid. And maybe that was true, until the foundation cracked. At noon, I stepped away from my computer and sat on the edge of the bed again. I let myself go back through it all, slowly, deliberately. I wanted to see it clearly, to stop idealizing it. I needed to strip away the warm filters I'd built around our memories and see them for what they really were. Like the way he always insisted we dine at high-end restaurants whenever we were with my parents. The way he got quiet anytime money came up, unless it involved something being gifted to us. How he once told me it made more sense to lease a new car in my name since my credit was stronger. At the time, I'd called it practicality. Now I saw it for what it was. He hadn't fallen out of love. He'd never actually been in it. I picked up my phone and opened our photos. There were hundreds. Vacations, birthdays, selfies in the kitchen. I zoomed in on his expression in one of them, his arm around me, smiling, perfectly posed. And yet, his eyes weren't looking at me. They were looking just past the lens, as if he was already aiming for whatever came next. I saved a few of the more recent pictures, not for nostalgia, for documentation. I had a strange sharp instinct to start gathering things, like a woman preparing for a storm no one else could see coming. By evening, I felt numb. He was in the living room, working on something he called a pitch deck for investors. He didn't offer details, he never did. Not to me. He asked what I wanted for dinner. I told him I wasn't hungry. He offered to cook anyway, said, "Let me take care of you." I watched him move around the kitchen, humming to himself. It was the same song he always hummed. Some old indie track he used to play when we first dated. I wondered if he hummed it for her too. I didn't ask. I didn't speak much at all that night, but I took note of everything. The way he watched me from the corner of his eye. The way he hesitated before bringing the food over, almost like he sensed something had shifted. When he finally sat beside me, he said, "You've been quiet." "Just tired." "Work stress," I said. "Something like that." He nodded and placed a hand on my thigh. I didn't move, didn't flinch this time. I was too far beneath the surface, too deep in the place where grief quietly transforms into clarity. Because that is what was happening now. I wasn't breaking down, I was waking up, and now every move he made became a study, a performance I'd watched too many times without realizing I was the audience. It had been 3 days since the phone call. 3 days of watching him brush his teeth, make coffee, kiss my cheek goodbye, all while knowing what he'd said about me, about us. The strange thing was how normal he seemed, not guilty, not careful, just ordinary. Maybe that was the most unsettling part, that someone could plan your betrayal and still sleep soundly beside you. Thursday morning, he offered to drive me to work, something he hadn't done in months. "You look tired," he said, adjusting his rearview mirror. "Figured I'd make your morning easier." I almost said yes. The old me would have been touched by the gesture. Now I wondered what prompted it. Was this part of the routine? Keep the wife happy, Keep the money flowing. I have a stop to make after work, I said instead. I'll drive myself. He nodded easily. No problem, dinner out tonight. That steakhouse you like. The one my father had recommended. The one we'd been to exactly twice, both times when my parents were paying. Sure, I said. At work, I couldn't concentrate. Every email felt pointless. Every meeting dragged. I kept replaying the conversation, trying to remember his exact tone when he'd said, "She won't see it coming." Casual, almost bored, like discussing the weather. During lunch, I sat in my car and called my sister. Not to tell her everything, I wasn't ready for that, but just to hear a familiar voice. "You sound weird," she said after 5 minutes of small talk. "Everything okay, just tired work stuff." "How is the husband?" The question hung in the air longer than it should have. "He is fine," I said, "same as always." That doesn't sound convincing. I forced a laugh. "I am just in a weird mood, ignore me." But after we hung up, I sat there thinking about her words. Same as always. That was the problem, wasn't it? He was exactly the same. While my entire world had shifted, he remained unchanged. Because for him, nothing had shifted. This was always the plan. That evening at dinner, he ordered wine without asking what I wanted. Made a toast to us and the future we're building. "Do you ever think," he said, cutting into his steak, "about what we want our life to look like in 5 years?" I tilted my head. "Just bigger things. You know, your family has this amazing foundation, this network. Sometimes I think we could be doing more with it." The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced this conversation. More like what? I don't know. Partnerships. Investments, building something that lasts. He was testing the waters, seeing how receptive I was to involving my family's money in his plans. "That is pretty vague," I said. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "I guess I am still figuring it out. Just feels like we have so many opportunities we're not taking advantage of." Later that night, I watched him sleep. His breathing was steady, peaceful. No signs of guilt or worry, just a man resting after a productive day of manipulation. I lay awake until almost 3 a.m., not thinking about revenge or confrontation, just trying to understand how I'd missed it. How someone could share a bed with you, share meals, share conversations about the future, all while planning to leave you once they'd extracted enough value. The next morning, I decided to pay attention differently. Not to snoop or investigate, not yet, but to really see him, to stop filling in the gaps with my own hopes and assumptions. When he said, "I love you," before leaving for work, I watched his eyes. They looked just past me, unfocused, like he was reading from a script. When he texted me at lunch, "Thinking of you, beautiful," I noticed he sent it at exactly the same time he texted me yesterday and the day before. When he came home that evening with flowers from the grocery store, I realized he'd done the same thing last month. Same flowers, same timing, same casual. "Saw these and thought of you." It wasn't spontaneous affection, it was maintenance. That night, over leftover takeout, he asked about my day with the same interested expression he always wore. But when I mentioned a problem with a client, he nodded and immediately changed the subject to his own work. He hadn't actually been listening, just waiting for his turn to talk. These weren't new behaviors, they'd always been there. I'd just been too willing to see love where there was only routine. By Sunday, I felt like I was living with a stranger. Not because he changed, but because I finally saw him clearly. The man I'd fallen in love with had been a carefully constructed character, and the performance was so polished, so consistent, that even he seemed to believe in it. That afternoon, while he watched a game in the living room, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't want and started making a mental list. Not of evidence or proof, just of things I'd noticed. Things that suddenly made sense. How he always suggested expensive restaurants when my parents were joining us. How he'd grown quiet whenever I mentioned wanting to help pay down his student loans. How his business ideas always seemed to require connections my father could provide. How he'd pushed for a joint bank account within 6 months of marriage. None of it was dramatic. None of it was obvious. That is what made it so effective. I wasn't dealing with a villain. I was dealing with someone who had turned our entire relationship into a long-term business strategy. And he was so good at it, he probably didn't even see it as betrayal, just smart planning. By Monday, the performance resumed like clockwork. He kissed my forehead before leaving for work, said, "Don't work too hard," with a soft smile. I stood in the hallway, watching him gather his keys, adjust his jacket, and walk out like he had somewhere important to be. He didn't know I already suspected most of his meetings weren't real. That morning, I began documenting things. Not dramatic evidence, just details. I created a private note on my phone and titled it Observations. It wasn't meant to be legal or admissible. It was for me to remind myself when I started doubting that none of this was in my head. Tuesday, 12:47 p.m. Thinking of you text. Same time as yesterday. Used joint card for online consultation service. $145. Not discussed. Restaurant suggestion for next week. One my father mentioned during last family dinner. They weren't smoking guns, but together they painted a picture, and I was learning to read it. I started paying attention to the finances, not by hacking passwords, but by watching habits. He always offered to pay for dinners with friends, but used the joint card. He'd get vague when I brought up budgeting, and anytime I talked about scaling back, he redirected the conversation. By Wednesday, I noticed something new, panic barely beneath the surface. He came home early, which he never did midweek, and said he just wanted to spend time with me. I was polite, surprised, but not warm. He picked up on it. "You seem off lately," he said, watching me too closely. "Just tired. Is it work?" "Us." "Mostly work," I smiled gently. "Nothing you did." It wasn't entirely a lie. He hadn't done anything new. He was simply continuing what he'd been doing since the beginning. I had just started seeing it that night. I made a subtle shift. I casually mentioned that my dad was changing some things in the family business, restructuring, reallocating. I didn't elaborate, just let it hang. He looked up from his drink. "Is everything okay with him?" "Probably. He is just being careful lately." I watched the flash of concern in his eyes, masked quickly with a nod. "He always thinks 10 steps ahead," he said. I gave a small smile. It runs in the family. The next day, he asked if I wanted to go away for the weekend. Just us, a cabin up north, somewhere quiet. I almost laughed. A sudden romantic getaway wasn't his style, not unless he needed something. "Maybe next weekend," I said. "I have a few things I need to take care of first." He didn't push. But that night, he was more affectionate than usual, held me longer, tried to initiate a conversation about long-term goals, using phrases like real estate, generational wealth. I listened quietly. The truth was, I didn't know what my long-term goal was yet. All I knew was that it no longer included him. By Friday, I made a decision. I wouldn't wait for a perfect moment. I wouldn't wait for more evidence. I'd already seen enough. I didn't need a full plan. I just needed to start pulling away strategically. Calmly, I began with my accounts. Not the joint ones. Mine. The personal savings I hadn't touched since college. I scheduled an appointment with my bank manager, requested a new account in my name only, no digital trace linking to him. I moved a modest amount, enough to start a separation, not enough to trigger suspicion. That weekend, I visited my parents under the pretense of helping with tax season paperwork. I didn't tell them the truth. Not yet. But I asked a lot of questions, casual ones, about legal protections, about the trust. My dad gave me a look across the kitchen table. "Something on your mind?" I shook my head. "Just being cautious." He didn't push. He never did. Saturday night back home, he brought up the idea of us starting a business together. He said it casually, but I could tell he'd been rehearsing it. "We've got the brand, the last name, the connections. All we need is the right concept." "What kind of concept?" I asked. "I am thinking wellness. Something lifestyle focused." "Your dad might even know someone." I let him trail off. I didn't nod, I didn't push. I just looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see my husband. I saw the plan, the calculation, the person behind the mask, and he was starting to sweat. It showed in small ways. He started checking his phone more often, even when we were talking. Glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. The easy confidence from our early years had developed hairline cracks. Sunday morning, I mentioned that my family was going through a quiet financial reorganization. I said it while stirring my tea, not looking at him, casual, measured. "Is that serious?" he asked immediately. "Not really," I replied, "just tightening a few things. My dad's getting stricter about how assets are managed." He nodded slowly. "Makes sense, smart move." But I noticed he didn't touch his coffee after that. And when I excused myself to take a call from my sister, I heard the floorboards creaking in the kitchen. Pacing that evening, he was overly attentive. Made dinner without being asked. Lit candles, asked me what kind of vacation I'd want if we just ran away for a while. "Somewhere quiet," I said. "No signal, just air and space." He smiled like that meant I was still his, but the smile looked tired around the edges. Monday morning, I started researching. Nothing dramatic. Just information gathering, financial consultants, storage facilities. I googled phrases like financial manipulation in marriage. I wasn't ready to act on any of it, but knowledge felt like armor. That afternoon, while he was at a client meeting, I walked through our house differently, not snooping, just noticing. The way he'd positioned his laptop so the screen faced away from the common areas. How he'd started keeping his phone face down during meals. The stack of business cards on his desk that hadn't been there last week. When he came home, he seemed agitated, said the meeting didn't go as planned but wouldn't elaborate. Over dinner, he pitched an idea for an app focused on financial literacy for couples. "People trust people with legacy," he said, gesturing with his fork. If we position ourselves as a team building wealth together, there is something there. He always used words like, we and team, when talking about money. But only my family's money Tuesday. I did something small but deliberate. I changed my banking password. Just mine, the personal account he'd never had access to anyway. It wasn't that I thought he was monitoring it. I just wanted to start drawing invisible lines. That evening, he suggested dinner out, said he'd made a reservation somewhere special. The restaurant was nice, too nice for a random Tuesday. During dinner, he was more animated than usual, talking about opportunities and building something lasting. But underneath the enthusiasm, I sensed something else, an urgency that hadn't been there before. I've been thinking, he said, cutting into his steak. We should be more intentional about our financial future. Maybe bring your dad into some conversations about investments. There it was, the real reason for the nice dinner, the candles, the sudden romance. That is pretty vague, I said. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. I guess I am still figuring out the specifics. Wednesday, I told him I'd be working late. Instead, I drove around for 2 hours thinking. I sat in a coffee shop and made lists in my head. Not evidence lists, clarity lists. What I knew, what I suspected, what I needed to understand. When I got home, he was waiting up, said he'd been worried. Asked if everything was okay with my family, with work, with us. Everything's fine, I said. Just busy. He studied my face like he was trying to read something written there. You'd tell me if something was wrong, right? He asked. I met his gaze, of course. It was the first outright lie I'd told him since this began, and it felt surprisingly easy. Thursday morning he was restless. Made coffee, then didn't drink it. Started conversations, then trailed off mid-sentence. Finally, he asked if I was feeling weird energy between us. Not particularly, I said. Why? He shrugged. Just feels like something's shifted. I looked at him. Really looked at the man I'd shared a bed with for 3 years. The man who'd cried at our wedding, who'd held my hand through my grandmother's funeral, who'd apparently been calculating our expiration date since the beginning. Maybe you are just stressed, I said. He nodded slowly, maybe, but we both knew it wasn't stress. It was the sound of a house of cards beginning to tremble. And I hadn't even started blowing yet. The final confrontation came on a Sunday. He'd cooked an elaborate dinner, lit candles, poured expensive wine. He was trying so hard to resurrect a ghost. Over dessert, I set my fork down. The sound was small but final in the quiet room. I want to talk about the call, I said. He froze, his wineglass halfway to his lips. What call? The one you forgot to hang up. The color drained from his face. I heard everything, I said, my voice calm, flat. Every word. He started to speak, tripping over excuses, explanations. It was out of context. I was venting. It didn't mean anything. I just watched him. I didn't interrupt. I didn't get angry. I let him unravel in the silence between my questions. When you said our marriage was awful, was that out of context? When you said you were only with me for the money, was that venting? When you said I wouldn't see it coming, was that nothing? He had no answer that could bridge the chasm between his words and the truth. He finally fell silent, staring at his hands. I think you should leave, I said. He looked up, his eyes wide. For how long? I don't know. He left that night with a duffel bag. The door clicked shut behind him. I locked it, not with anger, but with a profound, settling finality. The divorce was quiet, efficient. My lawyer was thorough. The paper trail of his financial maneuvers, the secret transfers, the dubious business expenses, spoke louder than any emotional plea. He didn't fight it in the end. There was nothing to fight for. The asset he'd been cultivating was gone. The last time I saw him was at the final mediation. He looked older. The polished charm had worn thin, showing the desperation underneath. He tried to say my name as I was leaving. I didn't turn around. Some people say closure comes with forgiveness. I disagree. For me, closure came in the silence. In the stillness of a house where I didn't have to watch my words or measure his moods. In waking up without dread. In knowing I didn't have to explain myself to someone who had never really been listening. I donated the dress I wore to that last steakhouse dinner. I threw out the wine glasses we only used for show. I replaced the silverware set we'd picked out together. Small things, petty maybe. But they made space. Now I wake up and make my own coffee. I take walks just because I want to. I don't check anyone's schedule before making plans. I don't filter myself to keep someone comfortable. The fear is gone. In its place is a quiet, steady certainty. I am no longer the woman being managed like an investment. I am no longer the wife someone chose for access. I am someone who saw the truth, held her ground, and walked away. And that, it turns out, was the real inheritance all along.